It's my pleasure to introduce Haaron Gonzalez, Office Development MVP, who will be talking about data form and XSLT data view web part remediation, and he will also show you how to move them into SharePoint Online. So thank you very much, Haaron, and I will pass the floor over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir, for your presentation. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. As I said, as it was mentioned by Rick, my name is Haaron Gonzalez. Today, we are going to talk about those components and applications that we may have currently running on-premise that we have not been able to migrate to online, to SharePoint Online. And those are the data forms and data view web parts, things that have been living for more than 10 years in our SharePoint environments. And now we don't know how to move them. So we will discuss how we were able to accomplish something like that. Of course, SharePoint conference events, the Microsoft 365 Collaboration Conference, everybody's invited, March 23rd to 25th, 2021. Let's go and see there. Of course, thank you to our sponsors, the ones that make this happen. Great companies, great people that work on these companies that have been presenting too in this event. Thank you, sponsors, for your generosity. So let me introduce myself a little bit. As I said, my name is Haaron Gonzalez with an H. It's the only one that has an H in the name. I don't know why my dad and mom did that, but they did it. So I try to use my name as Haaron, not with the H, all right? I work as an independent consultant supporting, luckily, North America and Latin America regions. So I'm able to actually support clients in Spanish and in English, supporting them on different regions along the way. And I like to think about myself as a solution developer. Doesn't matter the technology. It matters the solution that we are providing to the business based on a specific business scenario or a pain point that a company has. So as I said, I like to see myself as a solution developer. Doesn't matter the technology, but I do have my preferences. I have been lucky enough to be a 14-year MVP in a row. Different technologies. I started in '97 as a VB developer, Visual Basic developer. But in 2005, I got award as an ASP.NET developer. That was in 2005. And start work as always. I was working as a developer back then, a lot of stuff. But you know how it's life. At some point in time, they ask you to do SharePoint, even if you don't have any background on it. So I started doing SharePoint, and at some point in time, I got award as a SharePoint MVP in 2019, Office Server and Services MVP in 2013, and now in 2019, an Office Development MVP. So I talk about all dev-related topics like SharePoint Framework, building intranet portals, extranet portals, all related portals. Hey, we have a raffle here. Don't miss it. Please do what you need to do. Visit the vendor booth, submit your answers, and you need to be correct at 5 questions. So please go ahead. Also, we have donations. Let's share something. Let's do it. International Medical Corps and United Way. So how did I got into SharePoint? As a lot of us, our boss asked us to install SharePoint. In my case, it was Windows SharePoint Services 2.0. Remember that? There was the server version, which is SharePoint Portal Server 2003. So they assigned me a project as a member of the project. It was a huge modernization project for the government space. In a nutshell, the whole enchilada. We did Active Directory. We installed Exchange on-premise. We installed SharePoint Portal Server 2003. We built a whole intranet. We customized the branding solution of a SharePoint Portal Server intranet. We implemented right management services. Can you imagine that? And we built some InfoPath custom applications and my first kind of workflow on top of SharePoint Portal Server 2003. Back then, we didn't have a workflow engine. We only had the object model and event receivers. So I had to build event receivers to mimic a workflow behavior back in 2006, I guess, 2005, 2006. And I did learn. I got engaged with SharePoint development back then, but I learned everything I needed from first-hand experience. But guess what? It came SharePoint 2007 with Tom Rizzo, released MOS, Microsoft Office SharePoint Server. I was lucky enough to receive formal training on development topics related to Office SharePoint Server with the one and only Ted Pattison. And I learned SharePoint Designer 2007. With SharePoint Server, with Office SharePoint Server 2007, Microsoft introduced SharePoint Designer 2007, also known as SharePoint Destroyer 2007. But that's just a little joke. SharePoint Designer was the successor of Microsoft FrontPage. For those web developers back then, we were using FrontPage for building very basic HTML pages. So SharePoint Designer had the same engine there that we had in FrontPage. The cool thing about SharePoint Designer back then was that it had a workflow designer. Yep, it had the first workflow designer. No need anymore to build my event receivers to mimic a workflow. We have the possibility to decorate the workflow components or the workflow sequence in a designer. It will generate an XML file called XOML file that the workflow engine in SharePoint was to execute. Back then was Windows Workflow Foundation, .NET version of, if I remember, was 3.0. And with the introduction of this development experiences with no code necessarily, there were two components that changed everything. It was the data view web part and the data form web part to customize the look and feel of list views and the look and feel of form views. As you can see in this screenshot here, we have SharePoint Designer 2007 creating a specific form view. And then we have an example of a data view web port that displays task group, and then it has text box and date pickers controls. So you have a certain level of flexibility to build custom functionality. So if you were an ASP.NET developer, this was familiar to you. You know that we have server-side components, and with XML, we were able to configure those components and build whatever we needed. We actually were able to include ASP.NET controls in our ASPX pages in SharePoint Designer. So what is the data view? The data view is a live customizable view of a data source from SharePoint. The SharePoint Designer retrieves the data from a data source like a list or a library, and then in the format of an XML. So you will get the data in XML format. Then by using extensible style sheet language, SSLT, you were able to actually get the XML data and transform the XML to be displayed as something else, like a beautiful user interface. What Microsoft did with SharePoint Designer And with this concept of SSLT and XML was creating listen data views, add and remove and rearrange the columns in our views, support sorting and grouping of data, enable custom filterings in our views. This was a huge thing, conditional formatting. So being able to actually manipulate the background of a row depending on a specific criteria. Paging, you were able to control paging. Enable inline editing. Wow. Remember the data grid controls in ASP.NET that you were able to edit a record in your actual data grid control? So that was also supported here in a data view web part. You were able to edit a record and actually show that record in edit mode directly in SharePoint and then save the change there. The other feature was that it had an enable asynchronous updates. So it was using some kind of a AJAX functionality in the background to actually perform asynchronous operations and add toolbar options and apply views and styles. Yes, every ASP.NET developer, even someone that has web experience, will be able to edit the page and add some CSS, and with SSLT, transform the feed into something else different from the look and feel that we have in SharePoint. This is why I say that the data view web part was the holy grail for SharePoint developers back then. Long story short, a lot of companies started using the data view grid, a lot of developers, to build their user interfaces, to build specific web parts, to build and create experiences. Of course, those experiences using the out-of-the-box SharePoint branding, but a lot of people start using that. A lot of companies still use these customizations because with a content database migration, you are able to bring your customizations. So, as I said, lots of companies still use these customizations because the content database migration supports migrating all this content. So I have clients that they moved from SharePoint 2007 to 2010, and the data view web parts and data form web parts work. Then they migrated from SharePoint 2010 to 2013, and the data view web parts work. And then from 2010 to 2016, and the data web parts work properly. I have done that. I have seen that. But now we have SharePoint Online. Except SharePoint Online, we are not able to move forward necessarily in a more simple way with SharePoint Online. Why? Because no content database migration path is supported. Okay? That means that our lists and libraries and views need to be migrated, not copy over at content database level. And of course, because we now have the modern experiences, and those modern experiences relied on open web technologies, not on XML and SSLT technologies anymore. The reality is that our clients, some clients, still use some processes that have data view and data form web parts. And they need help to get out on-premise and move to SharePoint Online. And here we are with the possibility for helping these guys. So there's a good news. SharePoint Classic is an ASP.NET 2.0 application. Classic sites is still supported in SharePoint Online. Okay, so you can build and create a classic site in SharePoint Online, and therefore still support XML and SSLT. Of course, there are some trick and trips that you need to know to configure properly a classic SharePoint site in SharePoint Online. And this session is that about. We are going to talk about what do we need to do to build kind of SharePoint classic solutions inside of SharePoint Online. But hold on. Not everything is 100% compatible. So you will see this. Remember that rich text box control? In Internet Explorer, you have a what you see, what you get editor in IE. But in Chrome, we don't have it anymore. So that's the trade-off. That's the only thing that I can say that our users are gonna miss and that are gonna get impacted. The rich text box control is not supported, or the what you see, what you get editor is not supported on modern browsers. Okay? But there's a chance to move your investment to SharePoint Online. How do we do that? Well, we need to first create in SharePoint Online a new site collection using the SharePoint Classic experience. It's very simple. Just need to go to the Admin Center, the SharePoint Admin Center, click Create button there. Then you need to look for the other options. The other options here that will give us the possibility to pick and choose a template for creating our site. And we will select the More Templates option. And with that, then we will be able to see our, even I want to cry when I see this, our old Create Site Collection user interface. So we can actually select the specific Team Site Classic experience in SharePoint Online. So you will be able to create a site in SharePoint that will support the Classic experience and therefore continue using this XML SSLT kind of approach for customizing the look and feel of a page, the look and feel of a web port, or a specific solution. But there are things that you need to do also to configure this. In this case, you need to enable a specific site collection feature. That's the SharePoint list and libraries experience. Yes, when you create a site collection in Office 365, you automatically get the modern experiences. In this case, the page modern experience, the list, and libraries modern experience. So you create a team site in Classic experience, but you're also able to see the list or a library in a modern experience using all these fancy technologies that we use, React, CSS, HTML5, all the things that we have and support in SharePoint Framework. Actually, the modern experiences are based on SharePoint Framework. But because we are migrating a classic application, a classic experience, my recommendation is to activate the SharePoint list and libraries experience. So check this out. It says, activate this feature to turn off the new SharePoint list and library experience for a site collection. Okay, so if you activate this feature, when you navigate your libraries and lists, you will see the actual classic SharePoint experiences for your list forms and for your library views and list views. This means that we can still create and support our XML, SSLT, data view web parts, and data form web parts. As I said, this only applies for companies that have custom applications built on a classic experience and that they need to maintain the same experience. Believe me or not, there are clients that their processes depends on those technologies, and they don't want to move to the new environment, to the new experiences for one reason, because they have a bunch of users that rely on that application. Okay, so they need the actual move the application functions, code, etc. to SharePoint Online and continue to be productive, and then remove those old servers from on-premise. In this case, I got hired by a company that had a client that needed to migrate everything. In this case, a very huge application for case management that was used and built with data view, data from web parts, and data connection web parts too. Okay. So, what are the steps for migrating your SharePoint Classic investments? In this case, your data view web parts, your data for web parts. Well, you need to use one of your most, or the tools that you use to migrate currently. In my case, the one that I want to showcase here is ShareGate, ShareGate Desktop. If you are planning to move your on-premise environment to SharePoint Online, just use ShareGate Desktop. I don't work for them, but I've used the tool so many times. Clients buy the tool, and I use the tool to migrate content, list, sites, workflows, you name it. It's a third-party app for migrating content from on-premise to SharePoint Online. It's heavily used in the industry. But let me give you some general migration hints. Make sure you create the proper mappings between the accounts that no longer work in your company with Office 365 based accounts. So when we migrate the data, lists, and libraries, we properly map those specific accounts to the Office 365 accounts, and we maintain the same, version history, the same names and things like that. In the project that I built, that I was able to work with, we did recreated older accounts in Office 365, then did the mapping, and then deactivate. Once we migrated, deactivated in Office 365 those older accounts. In this particular case management application, it was critical to have the trail back to see what case information, approvers, and things like that with the real name of the lawyer that did this, right? So in this case, we were able to create the new accounts in Office 365, use ShareGate to create a mapping between those older users with the newer accounts in Office 365, perform the data migration, the data migration properly set those users' names and values, and then disable or remove from SharePoint Online those new accounts that we created. And ShareGate was the tool that helped us did that. The other thing that you need to do is when you are migrating an older application, there's a high chance that you will have more than 5,000 records on a given list, on a given library. So you need to be aware on how will you manage those libraries that have more than 5,000 records. For those that doesn't know, remember, there's a threshold on the number of items that we can present on a given view, and that's 5,000 records. Suggestion here is to create an index column based on the created in the created field, and just order your views by year. So you will say, for example, 2012 records, and then you will filter that view based on the created date, where the date is less than the particular range of dates. And your view will be able to display less than 5,000 records for a given year. So just that's a little hint. Index your create column and filter your views based on the create field, and provide a range that represents the year that you are displaying, okay? Now, this is the deal breaker here. Every migration tool not necessarily will maintain the internal UIDs that we support on SharePoint. I don't know if you know, but when you create a list, when you create a column, your display name of the list and the column is different from a given ID that is unique. So when we migrate from on-premise to SharePoint Online, new IDs are created. New UIDs, it's the name of this little value. So when you migrate a list, the list will have a new UID in SharePoint Online. And guess what? Your data view web parts and your data form web parts, they have the reference to the UID value rather than the list name. So that breaks the actual migration because the new list have a new UID. Now, ShareGate, it does manage modifying your files to reference the new UID, okay? But depending on the complexity of the page, sometimes that works and sometimes that doesn't. So you will install SharePoint Designer 2013. You will need it. Install SharePoint Designer 2013. We will use it to open the SharePoint page and see the code of the page and remediate the actual UIDs that we need to modify in our data form and data view web parts. And this is very important. Please install SharePoint Designer 2013 and then install the SharePoint Designer 2013 Service Pack 1. That's super important, okay? By the way, it will ask you to review the computer. Once you install the SharePoint Designer 2013 Service Pack 1, you will need to restart the computer. Now, this is the trick. This is what you need to do when you migrate your data form and data view web parts. Number one, from the source environment, locate the web parts in your page and look for the UID from what list is reading data. So remember, the web part uses the UID of the list from where it's getting the data. So you need to get that value. And then make sure to find what's the new UID number of the new list created by the migration tool. Your job will be to replace the UIDs on the ASPX pages to reference the new list in SharePoint Designer. So notice this particular image that I have here. I have this list 1, it's a simple list, and then I have the on-premise UIDs, okay? And then the SharePoint Online UIDs. So your job, in order to make this work, is number 1, get the right UIDs from on-premise and online of the lists that are used on your data form and data view web parts. Okay? Once you do that, the work that you need to do is to use SharePoint Designer, open the actual file, in this case, the ASPX page, and replace the old UIDs with the new UIDs. And that's the magic behind your ASPX pages that have data form web parts, that have data view web parts, and that also have data connections between those web parts. It's gonna work if they are properly referenced the right UID value of the list from where it's returning the information. So with the 15 minutes that I have, let me show you a very simple demo here. What you see here is SharePoint Designer. This SharePoint Designer, it has ASP.NET code, but notice this. Let's see here. We have a data form web part here. Let's see, I think okay. We have a data form web part, and notice this, list name and list ID. These are the UID values that the web part itself used to get the data from the list. So this is the only value that you need to update. Of course, you need to go to your source environment, copy the code, paste it here, and then just replace the UID numbers. And your page will work as it works in your on-premise environment. Now, if I take this particular one and then search, there's a bunch of places where I will see reference this particular UID. So notice here, default value, there's a lot of UIDs that I do reference in my code. Here, as you can see. So SharePoint Designer has this option to allow you to actually do the replace option and to actually save and load the search criteria that you did. So let me show you. If I click open here, these are all the search criteria that I run this particular application to replace the UIDs. So I know that this page, it is referencing the list, in this case, settings, user, egrade settings. I will select, and now we have here the UIDs, and then I replace all. Then I open again the search, select another list, and then replace all. And then I open again, and then replace all. So your page will properly reference the UID values of the migrated lists. Okay, let me show you an example of this. I think I do have Internet Explorer here. Well, no, it's not Internet Explorer. It's my bingo site. As I explained, you need to actually create a site collection. The ones, let's do it here. Go to the admin center. Go to the SharePoint admin center. Under the active sites view, you have the create button here. Click create and use the other options. Don't create a team site or a communication site if you want to migrate a classic site experience. So if you want to migrate a classic site experience, click other options, and then from the other options dialog, just go to more templates. When we click more templates, guess what? We get the typical site collection creation form that we have and use for many, many years. So here, you just name your site collection the way you want, and guess what? Here we have a team site classic experience template. Okay. First thing you need to do, let's do that. Bingo dos, bingo number 2. Create site collection here. And that will start provisioning a new site collection. Okay. But the new site collection will use the classic experience. How this looks like? Well, let me show you. So this is the result. This is a site collection that is using the classic experience. Number 2, you need to go to the site settings and to the site collection features options. So at the bottom, you will find SharePoint lists and libraries experience. So you need to activate this feature. Because of that, you will be able to see when you go to site contents, instead of looking at the modern experience, you will look at the older experience, the classic experience here. So this is SharePoint Online, and notice these icons. This looks like SharePoint 2019. It looks like SharePoint 2016, like 2013. Okay. Now, the next step is to perform the upgrade that you need to do. You need to actually use ShareGate or whatever tool do you have, migrate the list, migrate the libraries, and even migrate the site page that you have. So I do have a site page here, IT Sync. As I said, new UIDs are going to be created now. This list called the critical site escalations list is just a list with data that I have migrated over. Okay, nothing fancy, but I do have a page. Let me show you a page that has an SSLT data view web part that displays the content group here. This is an older web part. Okay, so here we have it. If I expand it, then I have data. And notice that I can remove a record here. I just click this guy and it removes the record. That's the actual inline editing options of a data view web part working in Office 365 SharePoint Online. Let me show you something. If I click this icon here, I can click and now I have inline editing as we did it in SharePoint 2007 and in SharePoint 2010, 2013, 2016. Okay, then click Save. So this is an SSLT data view web part that we have been able to migrate to SharePoint Online under a classic experience. You can do it. So this is what I wanted to show you in this kind of little process explaining how we are able to actually perform a migration of pages that use data view web parts and data form web parts. The criteria and the actual magic here happens when you are able to identify the UX values for the older list and the newer list and replace those UID values in your ASPX code in your pages. Okay, so the magic, as I said, is make sure you identify your list, your on-premise UIDs, your SharePoint Online UIDs, and replace those UIDs with SharePoint Designer inside of your code. By using the search features of SharePoint Designer, you are able to save your search criteria and to open the previously saved criteria and apply it to your pages one by one until you get it done. So 339, any question, any suggestions, please go ahead.
We have no questions at this time, so but you've got you've got plenty of time.
Okay.
Yeah, doing good. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I was kind of expecting that this topic will not necessarily be too popular because it is kind of hard to migrate all these kind of things. But as I said, there are a lot of clients there that need this kind of approach to actually migrate properly the SSLT and data view web parts. So thanks everybody for joining my session. We are 5 minutes earlier, which is good. Thank you so much for you that are looking at the recording. As I said, my name is Haaron Gonzalez. Help DSP is my handle. You can contact me there. Look for me in LinkedIn. And any question further, just let me know. It is possible to not lose your investment that you have done for years on a SharePoint page-based application.